a Manousso Musing with Cindy Hyde of HoustonPrenupAttorney.com. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact dependent. Hey everyone, this is attorney Mac Pierre-Louis, lawyer, mediator, arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas.
And Natalia Ołowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland, this time from Berlin, Germany.
And I'm Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manousso from Houston, Texas, and in Newport, Rhode Island, a mediator, arbitrator, and trainer of mediators and arbitrators. And today I am very excited to have with us Cindy Hyde. And Cindy is one of the leaders and one of the movers and shakers and influencers for prenuptial agreements and postnuptial agreements. So our segment right now will be on prenuptial agreements and the benefit that they have. So often when people's hormones are in high gear, they're only thinking about they're not thinking about marriage as the most important financial project that they will ever do in their life and what it means to them should they need to end their marriage. So Cindy Hyde, who's an attorney and, as I said, the influencer for prenuptial agreements. Welcome, Cindy. We're happy to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I look forward to our discussion about my favorite topic in family law.
Well, there you go. So just to be clear, a lot of people aren't clear on what a prenuptial agreement is and when it can or cannot be written up or coordinated. Perhaps just talk about the parameters of a prenuptial agreement. What does this mean to the average hormone that's in love and wants to radically get married on a nickel? So
that's a great way. That's a great introduction and a great way to talk about how to plan your marriage, really, because I believe that, the marriage relationship is half about what you just mentioned. It's the love and affection and the reasons that we enjoy spending time together. But the other half of our life is really the very practical way of how we manage our financials. And if that is not got a solid foundation, if a couple is not on the same page in that respect, then it's going to absolutely affect their romance. And which, of course, the next step is potentially ending up in my office for other reasons. So I believe that making a marriage contract or a prenuptial agreement is one of the most loving things you can do for each other. It's one of the most mature, sound, and best ways to lay a foundation for a very happy life. And if you approach it from the aspect of creating part of an estate plan, because you absolutely should have a will immediately after, or right after you get married, because that changes everything in Texas. And if you have a prenuptial agreement, it needs to be compatible with the will, because if it's not, if one of you dies, that's called a lawsuit afterwards, and you don't want that to happen.
So having you on it and on our at LMI podcast, meaning Lawyers and Mediators International podcast, we discuss ways to avoid conflicts. Usually, for people, it is hard to understand. They are freshly in love. They're about to get married. Everybody's excited, butterflies in their bellies, and how they can go to a lawyer and discuss things that are, let's say, brutal or doesn't show love. There always comes this argument of, oh, you don't trust me. Why do you want to do that to me? What will my family say? And I do a lot of international law, and I see prenups really operating within this field. So people from different countries, different cultures, different backgrounds. My question goes to that. From your experience, what sort of areas do people regulate? Is it just strict law, or is it these things that women imagine for themselves? Like, oh, I want to stipulate that I am getting 100 roses on every single anniversary, and that I am not cooking at home, and I am having a lady that will help cleaning, and it will be financed by the husband.
This is a great question, and it's a very loaded question too. There are a lot of issues in here, so let's sort of break it down. First of all, I think let's approach the one first about how do you even talk about this subject without blowing up the bedroom, so to speak. And again, I think if it's handled in a way of an estate plan, because let me say this, I have basically two types of clients that come to my office, and I have a good sense of how things are going to go in their future pretty quickly. Because if the conversation starts out with, I want to make sure my future wife or my future husband is not going to get anything if this doesn't work out, that doesn't really sit well with me in the sense of having confidence for a long-term future. If someone comes in instead and says, I want to make sure that my wife or my husband is taken care of in the event of something happens to me, or, because maybe they have children already, I want to make sure that everyone is in a good position. That's a very different feeling. And so if you can start with that intention is everything. And do it in a way that, okay, let's be practical also. 1 and 2 marriages still might not make it. And if you were going to buy a home and you had a 50% chance of it burning down in a fire, you're probably going to buy fire insurance, right? So it's a kind of insurance policy as well. Because if you have a prenuptial agreement that addresses everything about your relationship, including some of these things that may or may not be enforceable, frankly, but can also be included in a prenuptial agreement, then I believe your chances of success go up dramatically. So if we talk about then the more lifestyle sorts of things about, I want roses every week, I want a maid service or whatever other things might be important to someone. I mean, I guess the answer is it depends. Are those things enforceable or not? It's going to depend on the court sometimes. Usually, lawyers are going to look at the financials and deal with what a couple would like to otherwise stipulate to be their property arrangement versus what the state where they reside, whatever their family code has to say about it. Now, in a state like Texas, and I realize this is beyond the boundaries of Texas, we're a community property state. So there are very specific, guidelines and rules for what that looks like after you get married. So you have separate property and community property, but let's say most of the states in the country, whatever you bring to the marriage is yours. And then the difference starts after marriage. What happens then? And so I get a lot of questions about that. But you'd be surprised how many couples do not talk about money before marriage. And this is a big red flag. I think it's just a very part of a mature relationship, especially when you're thinking about both in the short term and the long term. It's a good idea to sit down with the family lawyer. It's a great idea to sit down with someone who does trust wills and estates, so you can really understand what the future looks like financially, because it's critical.
Yes. So Cindy, thank you so much for coming on Manousso Musings. Really appreciate this topic. Actually, it's something that I've always been fascinated by, just because there's a little bit of controversy surrounding the whole topic of prenups. Again, in my experience, anytime somebody hears the word prenups, they always think what Natalia raised, which is that question of, well, don't you trust me? Why are you talking about money in such a way in case our marriage, dissolves? And so let's just get practical though. What are the mechanics, the basics of it? One, do you have to have a lawyer? Two, if you whether or not you do, is it legally enforceable? Is it binding? Can somebody get out of a prenup? Just can you give some basic hard and fast rules about prenups that people might not know?
Yes, another great question. And yes, you should always have a lawyer. Both parties should be represented, because one lawyer, as you know, cannot represent two people. There you have a conflict of interest. And one of the reasons that there is a potential for setting aside a contract is, is duress. And if you have, so if someone feels pressured to sign an agreement, that's going to be a problem with respect to your enforceability. These are all very fact-specific types of cases. If you do, if they do face a contest down the road, the courts now, though, there is a presumption of enforceability. However, they still have to be done properly. Like in Texas, for example, you have to sign a waiver of disclosure first. There are certain elements in your contract that need to be in there, and then potentially a property agreement afterwards. If someone's just going on the internet and pulling a form, I mean, honestly, the only one that benefits is the form company. I can't even dream of trying to do that because they are so technical, and not all family lawyers even like to draft them. I really enjoy this because I'm a part of creating a happy life for couples. I mean, that's the way I look at it, because I try to bring up all the things that need to be considered. So what happens, first, I sit down with a client, we go through all the issues. When we're done drafting, then I send it to opposing counsel, and there might be more issues to negotiate or not. And then we prepare for what I call a signature ceremony. So we have, not all lawyers do this either, but it's an extra level of protection for both parties. So they each are very clear about what it is they're signing, and there's no question that they know what they're signing too. And that takes about an hour. And so the practical steps are, you come to my office, we have a talk about what it is you're trying to accomplish and why. We get to work on your contract. That goes back and forth to opposing counsel, if necessary. And then we do a signature ceremony, and then you come back and do a property agreement. Now that's Texas. I don't know how other states might operate, but yes, you both need to be represented by counsel, and the same lawyer cannot represent two people.
Cindy, that was excellent to get a framework of what needs to be done. It's a very limited market, though, of those who are qualified to put together a prenup. And you are one of the gurus that has the comprehensive understanding and understands all the bells, whistles, and dynamics that are involved. So what if somebody gets an attorney that is not informed as they should be, perhaps, on really what a prenup is, what's involved in the prenup? How do you advise a client? How does that work?
This is a really tough situation, honestly, and it's only because all of us do things that we focus our practice sometimes on particular areas that do require some level of additional understanding, put it that way. I mean, I wouldn't dream of stepping into the world of trust, wills, and estates planning, because it's not what I do. However, you'd be surprised how many lawyers in that field feel like they can pull a form and draft a prenuptial agreement. So that issue has come up many times, frankly, and also with business attorneys, particularly with clients, or it's usually someone on the other side of the table who's represented perhaps a businessman or a businesswoman for a number of years, and that person wants that same attorney to draft the prenup. Well, it's not the same. The issues are not the same. Mm-hmm. And so, unfortunately, generally speaking, they're not a successful exercise, because you just can't. I can't be in a position of educating opposing counsel about something that they really. I wouldn't do that for anything, a criminal case, a personal injury case, or whatever. I mean, you just don't take on these kinds of cases that you're not familiar with. but it does happen, and it does not bode well for the client, unfortunately. And in numerous times, we've simply not been successful in reaching agreement.
And if I could just ask also as a follow-up to that, is mediation or arbitration ever used in the pre-planning of a prenup?
I have not done that personally. However, I like to include clauses in prenuptial agreements that require a couple to first go to mediation if they have an issue or if they have a concern about the interpretation or how they're applying their contract. And then an arbitration clause too. Now we've got some potential drawbacks in the family law world about putting these arbitration clauses in there, but I'm still a fan. I think that's the best way to settle conflicts. I am not a big fan of slugging it out in the courtroom on any issue, really, if it's possible. Mediation is such an attractive, less stressful way to approach any conflict, and this is absolutely no different. I mean, the more experience you can have at the table, the more years of life, the more knowledge you have about various subjects, you're just better off. It's just, I love what you guys do. I'm your biggest fan.
Thank you for that. And tell us, Darren. So, but we fail at mediation, or we don't have the mediation clause, and we did the prenup with you, but then we are in trouble. How does it work? Is it a binding agreement? How do you evoke it? Is it a part of the divorce proceedings? How do you use it? What's the practicality of using it once it's being signed? How do you enforce it?
Oh, you mean how do I enforce a mediation?
No, how do you enforce the prenup? How do you enforce the prenup when things go wrong?
Well, you have a prenuptial agreement is a marriage contract. It is a contract. And so you know, like any relationship with or without the agreement, I mean, what are your options? You're either going to try to work it out, or, the other possibility might be divorce, in which case a prenuptial agreement has already handled most everything that you would address in the division of a property settlement, because we cannot handle child issues. You can't deal with child support or any of the issues around children, especially if they're not born yet. I mean, that's another misunderstanding. Some people, they think, oh, well, we're going to talk about our kids, and well, you can't. That's out of the circle of what you can deal with in a prenuptial agreement. So having a prenup is the easiest way, frankly, to approach a divorce process, because everything should be already settled. And that keeps you, again, out of the courtroom, hopefully. But if you can sit down with a mediator, especially if that clause is in your contract and says we need to do that, and then talk about what are the issues, like any subject, and hopefully they get resolved.
So, Cindy, just man on the street kind of thing. What do you typically see? But I guess be edgy for us. Like, if we could be a fly in the wall to just what are the things that kind of blow your mind? I'm just curious.
Oh, wow. I wish
Great question.
I wish I had prepared for that a little bit. We could have maybe a 3-hour conversation. Just when I think I've heard everything, and then, something else might come up. But let's say, as far as prenuptial agreements go, we can address anything that is not against public policy, anything that a court would sort of frown about. I guess one of the most frequently asked questions is about a fidelity clause. Well, what if he cheats? And usually it's a female, frankly. And what if he cheats on me? I want a penalty in there to do, I want X amount of dollars if he, well, I can draft them. I don't like to draft them. And here's why. One of the reasons that you have a prenuptial agreement is because you want to stay out of the courtroom. You do this for simplicity's sake, and also for, again, enhancing your relationship and know where you stand, from the get-go. If there's an issue about trust, then you might want to really step back and take another look at getting married in the first place. Number one, that's my personal opinion. But because, the intention is to handle these outside of the courtroom, you might have a burden of proof issue. So unless someone is admitting, yes, I had a relationship or had a moment with someone and, oh gosh, that's going to cost me $500,000. I don't know how many people are going to really admit to that. And then you have the issue of proof and you're back in the courtroom. Then you might have invasion of privacy issues. You might, there's just lots of sort of messy things that go along with those types of clauses. Now, let's talk about something a little more pleasant. If you're talking about, gosh, I don't want my wife to gain more than 20 pounds. I mean, that's sort of a horrible thing to put in a prenup, and it might not be enforceable, but you can write down whatever you like. At minimum, it creates and expresses the intention and the framework for what it is you expect from your relationship. And that in itself, I think, has a value.
Cindy, when we first talked about you doing this interview today, which has been fantastic and I know very informative for people,
Thank you.
You mentioned one thing to me which I thought was very funny, and it's still making me giggle, about the timing that a person had asking about their prenup. Could you address that, please, again?
Oh, I would love to. Thank you for mentioning that. One of the most frequent questions is, how long is it going to take to draft, or how much is it going to cost? And these contracts take a little bit of time, but the record is, someone called me, I don't know, it was like 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning on a Friday afternoon and said he's interested in drafting a prenuptial agreement. I said, okay, wonderful. When are you getting married? He says, I'm at the courthouse. We're getting married at 4 o'clock. I was just, that was, before that, the record was 1 week, I think, or 5 days. But, you really need time to talk through, negotiate. You've got another lawyer involved. You have 4 schedules at least involved, because there might be other issues that need some clarification. Give yourself a couple of months before getting married, and even 3 months is better, I think, because you also want to put some space between the time of signature and your marriage, the marriage ceremony itself. I mean, there's nothing in the Texas Family Code anyway that says you can't get married right, can't sign a prenup right before getting married. However, I just don't think it's the best thing to do. I mean, give yourself a few weeks at minimum to sign that contract. It's only going to become effective at the date of marriage. And then if you haven't been married within 90 days of signature, then it's, typically maybe not going to happen anyway. So we stipulate very specifically where and when you're getting married. So
thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on prenuptial agreements. You're in Houston, Texas. Cindy Hyde, thank you for sharing on Manousso Musing.
Thank you, Barbara. Appreciate the
Bye-bye.
time today with you guys. Enjoyed it. Bye-bye.